everybody. Welcome back to our podcast and YouTube channel, Simply Human. Karen, welcome back. It's good to see you again.
And welcome back to you after your nomadic type of trip, huh?
Yeah, folks. I was on it was actually a total of 5 weeks doing a road trip in the Intermountain West from where I live in California through Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, and Nevada. So I just got back and we wanted to get this episode, make sure there wasn't a gap between because we're so excited about sharing this information with you. And we are on a roll right now, revisiting the topic of boundaries because of some requests that we got from listeners who were asking for a little bit more in depth on how to have effective boundaries when there are different challenges. Our last episode, we did people pleasing. And Karen shared a lot of her own experience and struggle with people pleasing. And another person who contacted talked about their challenge with feeling like, how can they do boundaries because they feel guilty? Like they feel like they're literally doing something wrong, having boundaries. We thought this would be another good episode to do boundary busters. And I call it guilt vulnerability. So there are some people who are a little bit more vulnerable or wired or have learned to feel bad and to feel guilty in their life. So we're going to go over like what guilt is and briefly differentiate between guilt and shame. And then we're going to talk about how that impacts our boundaries and how it can undermine boundaries, and give some examples about how this might play out. So hopefully it might resonate for you. Review real quickly because we want you to be aware of the psychological impact that this can have, and then talk about some strategies to help you deal. Well, what do you do if you're prone to guilt? How do you get better at having boundaries and not feeling bad when you do it? Does that sound like a good plan, Karen?
Yeah, and I think it's emotional and psychological too, again, right? The heaviness and the suffering that you have. And I got to tell you guys, I always feel like I'm like the test case for you guys because, again, it wasn't just fitting in. I have problems of creating boundaries. I told you earlier, I'm not very good at boundaries, getting a little bit better than before. But I also have a lot of guilt. And what I loved about what Christina said, it was guilt that I've had from learned behaviors and things like that. And so again, though, before we just dive in, we'd love for you to just hit that button to subscribe and like, and because that really helps us be able to continue to bring this to you on these topics that we want to share with you and also that you request.
Yeah, thank you. And so I did a little bit of research on this topic. And one of the first studies that I came up with was actually by Chinese researchers. And yeah, because the issue of guilt, it's in a lot of different cultures, but in Asian culture, there is a pretty deep foundation on cultural norms that are triggers for both shame and guilt. When you do the research on it, you actually find a lot of studies are coming out of Japan and coming out of China. And so I went to look at evolutionary psychology. I like to look at like, where do these things come from? Why does the brain influence these types of behaviors? One of the things that this study by L. Shen pointed out is that guilt and shame are considered moral emotions. So they're emotions that are associated with our sense of morality. And our morality is there, it's kind of like the conscience of our culture. So it plays a role in, we send these messages through our stories, through our cultural norms, through our practices. We learn throughout our life what is within the acceptable range and what is outside of that. The purpose is to help us not have a society that's falling apart, because we will have this emotion of guilt. Karen, like you've asked this question before about the distinction between guilt and shame. Like, do you actually feel that there's a subtle difference between the two?
I learned the difference because of Brene Brown's work. When she actually did the shame work and then she explained the guilt. And so, and then I realized, man, I was living in so much shame and not even guilt. And so I
Mm.
think that's the whole point of shame, is that whole thing is that I am bad. Like everything is around, like even if I did something wrong, I go right to I am bad. I'm terrible. I can't, like it is me. I can't think of it as a singular event. It's just one more notch. So, and I think it's really important to separate the two and to realize that shame is something that we don't have to exist with because everything is singular. It's not a compounded. Because I always thought about shame as more compounding, kind of like one more notch that I'm bad. I'm already looking for how I'm terrible, especially in Passion.
Mm-hmm.
Rosie about, and one more prove that I'm terrible, I'm going to get fired, right? So it's that one more thing. I think that's the whole point of the difference between shame and guilt, is I'm just looking for that one more thing. Where guilt, you can let go.
Oh, that's interesting. And what do you mean by let go?
Well, I think the guilt is like an episode. Like I
Okay,
think I still feel
right.
bad. Like I have that, like I've done something wrong
Mm-hmm.
and I feel bad about it, but it doesn't define me
Mm-hmm.
and knock me to the ground. I feel like like shame just knocks me and slaps me and punches me to the ground, like And I think guilt can still, that you've done something bad and you could, I don't know. Does that make sense? What I'm
Yeah,
saying?
actually, you're hitting right around what they see in the research, because they're actually in the process of still trying to understand this phenomenon of shame and guilt, because there's such painful, difficult emotions. Like Karen said, shame we could define as a deeply felt sense within oneself that I am bad, versus guilt is the recognition that I've done something bad or I've done something wrong.
Right.
And what some of the research has found is that shame tends to be maladaptive. And we're not going to really cover shame because Dr. Brene Brown really has the
Does a great.
seminal research on it. And you could really go read about it or watch her YouTube videos for really an excellent sort of overview on shame. But guilt, so whereas shame is what we call maladaptive, it is not contributing to the benefit of the person or the society. It actually increases aggression. It increases the tendency to want to avoid. It increases the tendency to want to hide. Whereas guilt can be adaptive. And what they mean by adaptive is that it tends to have a positive reason for existing, and it can positively influence or serve the individual or the society. And how guilt works is that it drives behavior. And they've identified three main behaviors that come out of adaptive guilt. And so, first, it's that the anticipation of guilt prevents people from doing social transgressions. And it's associated with more sort of cooperative and altruistic behavior. And it decreases our tendency to just violate norms right and left. And so when Karen and I were talking about this, I told her, I said, I don't have that vulnerability, that proneness to guilt, but I think because I'm really strong on this first one, I'm more preventative. So it drives behavior that will avoid transgression as much as I can. And even if I do, because of the autism, I do transgress social norms, it's not in my intention, it's because I don't know. And so the second thing that guilt does is it drives reparative behavior, meaning if there's a violation of a norm or doing something wrong, guilt drives us to go make it right. So to repair the rift that the behavior may have caused, and it drives us to apologize. It also For people who like they recognize they feel guilty because they did something wrong, they're more willing to accept, a punishment for it as a pathway to restoring the social connections. And then the third thing is that adaptive guilt leads to forgiveness. So it's what will drive us to, like, we have to be self-forgiving, or because we feel bad and we are genuinely sorry, it will tend to trigger the group members to accept the apology and to forgive. So this is what's sort of considered the adaptive aspects of feeling guilty. It
Oh,
drives positive social behavior.
yeah, I was thinking a little bit about it because I was always thinking about, because I'm Catholic.
Mhm.
I was Protestant, became Catholic, and it is that funny thing about that Catholic guilt. It does keep me kind of in order, not in order, but gives me some, like a compass, I guess.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
And then it's just funny about this third person guilt leads to decreased punk behaviors and forgiveness and things like that. And I always think about, like, it does. It makes you want to say you're sorry. It's just what I'm learning. It's what I've learned. So this is the whole point about learned behavior. It goes back to the learned behavior where, like, even as a Christian, and they didn't even forget about the Catholic. I mean, there's certain Christian values we have about being a Christian, right? But even a Buddhist still has those type of values. So it's very interesting about the word, about the learned behaviors we have, and how in some ways I feel like some of it has gone out the window because of the environment that we're in right now in
I
the
know.
world. But I felt as though my basis still is there for me, that I feel as though, like, I know I'm a giving person, and I know, kind of like, things even at work, when I think about it, was, just even opening doors for a person, male or female, older or younger, the ability to help just open a door and not just let the door shut between the next person. Like, that happens sometimes. But I keep thinking about that's just a little thing, right?
That you
um
would feel bad.
if I
Yeah.
accidentally, like, the person came and I said, oh, I'm so sorry, I should have opened the
Right,
door for you. It's exactly,
right.
that's the point,
Yeah.
right?
So it drives pro-social adaptive behavior, and
Yeah.
you just said is right. Well, if we look at what's going on in the country right now, we're almost seeing an increase in shamelessness
Hmm.
and complete lack of guilt and remorse, and
Mhm.
we're seeing the fraying not even at the edges, like we're seeing the fraying in the heart of our society where we're becoming polarized, and it's like the perception is like they wronged me, and so I can do this and I'm justified in doing it, and there really is no guilt, no genuine guilt and remorse, and the absence of guilt and remorse is actually not healthy for
Yeah.
our society. But what we're actually going to focus on today is when guilt goes awry. It goes off the deep end. It gets distorted. And now it's no longer adaptive guilt. It becomes maladaptive guilt. So mal, like the word malicious, or you think about viruses,
Malware.
malware, like mal, it's like bad. So
She
it's
told me that in advance of this podcast, the word malware, so I thought I would bring that up.
maladaptive, malicious. It's it's guilt that is no longer serving that reparative and cohesion in social norms. Guilt that's almost running rampant is now generally can become harmful to a person. And what they've found is that people who are prone to being overly vulnerable to feeling guilt, they tend to be over responsible, and they take on feelings of having done something bad, even when objectively they have not, is that there's more of a tendency to take on punishments, even though it's not deserved, or even to punish, beating oneself up, punishing oneself. And that's actually can be harmful to the individual when it's inappropriate, it's excessive, it's a distortion. When people are vulnerable to this, what we find, there's a real challenge to having healthy interpersonal boundaries, because when we're feeling guilty, and all the time, it triggers certain types of behaviors.
Yeah.
Unlike the three I mentioned before that were helpful, it'll trigger behaviors that are not helpful. And one of them is pleasing. We talked about pleasing behavior, right? How guilt, Karen, do you want to talk about how you feel guilt drives pleasing behavior?
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting part is that's what creates that chronic stress in your life is this guilt of having to overcommit and say yes. We did that earlier too about fitting in, and we say yes when we don't really want to.
This
Wrong.
case, we're more talking about when you actually feel guilt
Oh
and
yeah,
then
yeah.
say yes,
When
right?
I just remember always feeling guilty. I don't even remember when I do not feel guilty. Like when I'm serious. Like you laugh, but I swear when I look back, someone would wait, and I don't know if this is what we're talking about. If someone were to say something and I wasn't so sure it was my fault, I would take the blame anyways.
And why?
I just because I'm just used to being full of guilt, but I don't know if that's shame or guilt. This is the interesting part of this, and I think the guilt was like also again taking on too many responsibilities, agreeing to doing things all the time, despite what I can do. I guess it's the should, right?
This
I should
should,
help
if
out,
yeah,
right? It
should.
goes back to the should. I should help out,
Mhm. Yeah,
and
I
I
think
think
what can help people differentiate if guilt is present. Remember, guilt is the feeling that comes when we believe we're doing something wrong.
Mhm.
So if someone makes a request like you're talking about, and you feel like you're doing something wrong to say no, you're going to feel guilty to not be there. You're going to have a should going on in the background. I mean, that
Yeah,
could be your practice is to start to notice like is there a should going on in my head, because that's going to be your little warning sign to stop and say, wait, am I feeling guilty? Although we're going to get a little bit to the practices a little bit later.
yeah,
I just want to again just go through. So guilt can trigger people pleasing because I feel bad if I let you down.
yeah. That's me.
Guilt can cause you to have difficulty even putting out or asserting your own needs or your own preferences. And I see this all the time as a therapist where my clients will have a hard time having a voice because they'll feel bad. Like, well, what if they don't want to do the thing that I want to do? And then I'm going to feel guilty if we're doing the thing I want to do. And I don't want to feel guilty. So I just won't say anything,
Oh my
and
god, that's like me again too. So
yeah, we talked a little
no,
bit
but I
about that
love
and
like
people
last time.
pleasing.
It's just important for you to assert your needs. It's not asserting like saying it has to be done, but it's sharing, so then people can decide. I think we spoke about that last time too, where
Mhm.
you. It's worse when you don't they ask you where do you want to eat. Oh no, whatever you decide. And then there's this thing where because I'm feeling guilty, so I don't want to take off. But I remember you saying that sometimes it's the point of where they kind of can feel angry because I'm always like saying, you
You
decide,
decide.
right? They're responsible. Maybe you could share that. Maybe you can share that again
I can share
about the
which.
maybe you could share about when a person, which you found out is if I keep saying, you decide, right? And
Mhm.
I don't have the difficulty to assert the need because I feel guilty, right? That I
Mhm.
don't want to make them, have my way, right? So I'm
Mhm.
asserting, quote unquote, my needs. It actually doesn't help a relationship and actually creates
Right.
some
Well, I think you just did a good job of explaining it. Because
oh see
so usually the underlying belief is that, well, I'm being selfish
oh yeah, that's the big one.
for,
I used to use,
injecting
yep,
my need, and being selfish is bad, therefore I feel guilty.
yep.
So, this is where we've talked about how important it is to be clear about your values. And if you have this value around altruism or serving others, you might be someone who's vulnerable to feeling guilty because then your own needs become something that makes you do bad things by being selfish or pushy or whatever the story is that you're telling yourself. But like Karen said, if you're never putting your truth out there, you're not being clear, then it really is putting a burden on other people to always be making the decisions. You're avoiding guilt, but now you're creating another type of problem, resentment or burden on the other person. So,
Exactly.
you can see there's really quite an overlap. I mean, in some ways, guilt is the other side of the coin of people pleasing. We tend to people please because the feeling underneath is guilt. I don't want to feel bad. So I will, if that person's happy, then I'm doing the right thing. If they're unhappy, it must be because I did something bad. Not
Exactly.
all the time. So it's like a Venn diagram, and there's just a lot of overlap here. But this feeling of guilt that I'm doing something wrong, that the mere fact of having boundaries, I'm doing something wrong, you're going to feel guilty. Boundaries go out the window. And this is why I got this question of, I hear what you're saying about boundaries, but I don't even know how I would do that because I feel so guilty. I feel so bad that I feel I'm doing something wrong. And like Karen said earlier, it's learned behavior. Guilt is learned. And so it's really important for us to start bringing some curiosity into our experience, because we have to kind of get down into the root, like, where did I learn that I should feel bad anytime I have a need? Do you believe you're worthy? Are you worthy of having a need, having a preference? Because sometimes that's the underlying thing of guilt. If I, like Karen, that's what you're saying, I don't know where the shame ends and where the guilt begins.
Uh-huh.
That's usually what's there. Is there's gotten some confusion about inherent worthiness. Instead of inherent worthiness, it's questionable worthiness. And so and this is where Karen's coaching on self-trust, right? This is a big part of really what you're passionate about working with people. I don't know. Do you want to talk a little bit about self-trust, how that intersects here?
I think that's the whole point again about being able to really assert or share your needs and preferences and trying it and realizing that you're ready. Because I remember when I didn't want to share, I was already putting in judgment that that's not right. I'm already prejudging it instead of putting it out there with curiosity about what the reaction would be. And I think that since I learned this and just does that with my husband, with my daughter, with my workmates, so and so on, even church obligations, I don't always say yes, now explore more. I don't go
Mhm.
right into saying yes or no, explore more and understand how much time, what the expectations are. See if there's a better fit or better way to involve other people than me who always says yes too. And then I started to realize, wow, it's such more powerful. It has much a powerful outcome.
Yeah, and then this sense of worthiness. And from more the Buddhist tradition, there's this concept that the fact that you exist means that you are worthy. And there are many people who that's not been what their life experience has been. If you grew up in a home where you were criticized all the time, shamed all the time, punished all the time for minor infractions. Didn't really matter. It's just you were always in trouble. So I'm talking about childhood through adolescence, which is when we're forming our self concept and our idea of ourself. If you grow up in an environment, kind of think about trying to plant a seedling in an environment where there's just always toxic waste being dumped, you're not going to get a plant that's thriving. You're going to have a plant that's just in survival mode and just doing its best not to die. And it could be, not just abusive homes and emotionally abusive homes. There are just sometimes really harsh cultures. I mean, there's a lot of comedians out there for Asian culture about, if you like if you get a B in school, it's equivalent to an Asian F, and it's like you're not enough, you messed up, you didn't do well. Just this constant messaging. If that's where you learned that your mere existence and being is usually you're doing something bad, this is where therapy or having a coach that really works on going back and challenging the stories and the tape recordings that you inherited from that early experience, what you learned early on, because you're going to have to challenge it and start going through that file cabinet, go through those recordings and, hit erase, delete, 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 delete what doesn't serve you anymore, and replace it with your own value system and your own ability to evaluate your behavior and how you're interacting. And that can be very, very hard to just do on your own. So this is definitely something, it helps to have an outside person who could be an objective voice to challenge you. Because that's what happened for me in therapy. I thought I was just fundamentally bad. And my therapist would keep pointing out, she's like, man, you are so annihilating to yourself. Or, why do you think that's bad? Was that really your fault?
Yeah.
Could it be something else?
Yeah, and I think that's what happened to me with my coach. And also it's happening for my clients where it's just so easy to go down that track, right? And I think that's the thing about the self-trust. Again, it's rooted in the fact that even as a Christian, I had this warped sense of bad because the Ten
Mm.
Commandments. I hate to say that, but the ten, you do not do this, you do, So I guess that for me, it was interesting when I started to listen to more and more about what it's about. It really, and I love this. I like Pope Francis, right? It's about love. The fundamental is God made you perfect, perfectly imperfect. You just know He really loves you. I'm just in awe. Like now, I can see myself and start to love myself as God loves me.
Yeah, but it's hard, Karen, right? Because
It's
it really
very
depends
hard. It's
on,
very hard.
but I mean, it depends on the faith community you grow up in. Because I know when I was in Virginia and I had some friends who tried finding a Catholic church, and they're like, oh my gosh, it's fire and brimstone. So there's what you talk about, having a personal relationship, but there's cultural norms, there's religious norms, there's family norms, there's, just our social norms, friends, where we're getting messages all the time on judgment, on judging our behavior, what's going to keep you in the cave, what throws you out of the cave. And so getting to a point to be able to discern, to have some independence in your thinking, to develop that self-trust and that confidence. And it could be grounded in a faith based in love as opposed to fear. But everybody's journey is going to be a little bit different. Understanding what's at the root of feeling guilty all the time, it's something, if you're prone to this, you're going to have to do, right? And
I think,
otherwise your boundaries are just, forget having boundaries.
yeah. But I also want to make people explore though too, because I think that's the whole point of what happened to you as a child, like we said earlier, the Catholic faith or whatever faith it is, Baptist, whatever it is, or any other thing like Chinese or whatever. It's taking that because a lot of things have evolved since then, right? It's also generational issues regarding my parents and the Chinese heritage versus now we're very different. My
Mhm.
generation, my daughter's generation is very different around, maybe because we're Americanized too. But even the Catholic faith, the whole with how they used to be versus how they are now is different. So that's why for me it's to understand
Mhm.
too. And I gotta tell you, it's when I began to see things differently because of the courses I took that allow me to see it more openly, exploring your religion or wherever you are with more curiosity, not take it as black
Yes.
and white. I think that's the beauty of it, and to explore it, because also the fact that you can see different things and experience different things in different places. I believe that the Lord brought us, like I believe, right? You and I in our cross path was not just because it was just supposed because it was supposed to happen, right? Because we grew together, we explored together. Who would have thought we became such good friends, right? That's the point
Mhm.
of that, right? And you opened my eyes to see different and open up to different things and vice versa regarding what I am. And I think the ability to explore and to just be curious and let things
Mhm.
unfold is what the self trust is about, is
Yeah.
really about to me.
Yeah.
It's not to live with the past defining the past. It's more like living in curiosity, using the past to give you experiences, a little bit of experiences, but not to define you, because every present moment is different than anything that you've done in the past. No circumstances are exactly the same. I love that whole point of where I love about what I do around self trust, because that's about getting internally with yourself, who you really are, but also trusting in that curiosity and the fact that you will make the right move. There is no perfect move. That's what I love about. Okay, guys, that's what I
Yeah.
love about what I do.
And And folks, I absolutely don't want anybody to misinterpret or feel that I'm not respectful of your faith. I am, I respect whatever faith you were born into, whatever you've grown into, whichever one you've maybe journeyed towards. And it's just what Karen is saying is be curious, because ideally, whether it's faith, family, education, school, society, whatever, what you want to be doing is being curious to say, how is this serving love? Is this serving health and wholeness?
Is it giving
And
me peace? Is it giving me peace or discourse? That you would always say, "Am I?"
yeah. And guilt's an interesting one, right? Because as we said
Yeah,
earlier,
yeah.
guilt is an emotion that, although it's uncomfortable, when it's working well, has an adaptive role. It makes us be aware of transgressions. It drives us to make repairs. It drives a willingness to be forgiving.
Mm.
So it's a difficult emotion, and it could either be really functional or it can go off into this extreme. And that's really what we're talking about. If whatever your life experience is has distorted or overemphasized or amplified the negative feelings of guilt, so that you are no longer objectively able to assess it. It's just a knee jerk, just a knee jerk. I'm feeling guilty. I can't have boundaries. That's when it's going to be harmful to your mental health. And that's just what we want you to be curious and start thinking about, because the consequences of not doing it are things like emotional exhaustion and burnout. Or you may be, like Karen said, saying yes, 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 and you don't have boundaries. And what we've talked about in our boundaries episode is the emotion of resentment starts to build because you're not having boundaries. So you're not feeling guilty, but now you're feeling resentment, and anger and hurt feelings or bitterness. If you constantly feel you're bad, you're going to be really harming or not doing much to nurture self-esteem and self-worth.
Create that chronic stress. Is like that ongoing overwhelmness, stress. Yeah,
You can have physical
exactly.
symptoms of
Yeah,
stress from
yeah.
feeling guilty. A lot of people will say they feel guilt in their gut, like they get tightness in their stomach. And then you get IBS and you get all kinds of
Well, it's
other.
true. It's true. Yeah, exactly.
So, in addition to curiosity, we just want to go over a few more strategies for overcoming a proneness to being over guilty, or to help you strengthen boundaries if you do deal with guilt. So, first was be curious. Where did you learn that you are bad? Or where did you learn that what you're doing is bad? I guess before you do that, you have to learn to recognize, what does guilt feel like? Like, sure, because Karen, you said you have a recognition that guilt feels more transient, like it's an episode, and like it comes but then it goes, whereas shame feels like it was always there.
It's heavy. Yeah,
um
more
do you
heavy.
feel it in different parts of your body, like it's guilt more of a thought than a feeling, or
And no, shame is definitely in the shoulders. I think guilt is more in the pit of my stomach.
a pit of your stomach? Yeah, a lot
I
of
would
people
say.
have guilt. I'm
I
not sure
think
why, but
guilt is more
yeah.
pit of the stomach, and I think
Yeah,
shame is when I'm like, not again. But
yeah.
yeah, it's either that or my heart. I haven't figured it out, but it's between some. Because sometimes
Yeah.
your guilt pushes your heart, right? But I think it's more my pit of my stomach.
Yeah, the point is that it's going to manifest differently for everybody. So we invite you to just try to identify, where is the sensation? What is the sensation? Is it a sharp pain? Is it dread? Where do you feel it in your body, so that you can recognize it? And then be curious. Is this familiar? What's my earliest memory of having this sensation? This is being curious to where you might have learned it. And then one of the things you have to learn when you're dealing with guilt is self-forgiveness, because forgiveness is the antidote to guilt. And the things that are helpful, if you've done a genuine wrong, then usually we know what it is, and then we know the path is to make amends. We take personal responsibility, we say, I'm sorry, we do what we have to do to repair, make amends. When you're having overblown guilt, I want you to go through the same process, because you'll find that you won't be able to think about what the repair is. Like, it'll just be, except for not having any boundaries. It's just going into pleasing. So you want to start looking at, how does this manifest? What are the stories that I'm saying in my head? I should do this, or they're going to be mad at me. I'm a bad person. Practice giving yourself permission that it's okay for you to have boundaries. And that's going to take some time. And that's where it helps to have like a coach or someone else who sometimes you just need that in the beginning to have someone else validate. No, it's okay that you didn't want to do that. It's okay that you said no to that person. You might need to have that kind of support to unlearn the automatic knee jerk response and to start learning the permission giving. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I also think what's helpful, like I said a bit ago, about it's not that you have to say no. What helped me begin to learn to say no is being able to have a dialogue about it. So it isn't just to say the word no. Although, you want to practice saying no possibly to just get yourself to say no because you're not used to. But I've learned it was so much easier for me when I started to be again curious and asking questions to better understand, because I could like take what is yes or no into understanding. Oh, I can do this piece, but I can't do this piece. And it wasn't necessarily a strong no. Also, adding what I would call dialoguing about this allows me to feel better about boundaries as well, and learn to have stricter boundaries, because I start to realize that it's not so much. It was easier for me to create boundaries when I started to have that dialogue. Let's put it that way. So I understood what I was really saying no to. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Uh-huh. Yeah, having that conversation gives you actually more information instead of the knee jerk.
Yeah.
I'm doing something wrong.
Yeah.
When you start to get more of that information, you can start saying, oh, well, I legitimately can't do that. And then you can recognize you're not doing something wrong when you say no, because now you've gotten more of the information. One of the reasons why this is so important, this being curious, taking more time to have conversations, practicing, like giving yourself permission to assert boundaries and asserting the boundaries, is because people who are prone to guilt are also much more vulnerable to having that guilt manipulated.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. If someone knows all they have to do is say,
Push
you
that button.
know, don't be that, it's push that guilt button on you, and then your boundaries collapse. You might as well have a, open sign for manipulation on your forehead. So if you don't want to be a target for manipulation, then this should be an incentive to do the work necessary to start tackling guilt. And by the way, folks, it takes time. You didn't learn this overnight. It's not going to change overnight. This is work that takes a long time. Again, having someone who is trusted and supportive and can be objective, because you need to trust the person. If you didn't trust the person who's saying, no, there's nothing wrong with doing that, you're going to be like, oh, you're just saying that. So
I
they
I
have,
I was
you know
also
what I
thinking
mean?
a little bit about the fact that's why I think it's important to go slow and not to, because it's like I almost had a braid of different experiences, like, that make me feel guilty. So there's like this whole braid. I have to do one strand at a time, because then I start to evaluate, I start to understand this one reaction I have that I'm saying guilty. So once you
Mhm.
start it, you understand that's why it's like that onion, or what I mean about a
Yeah.
braid, that one piece, that one thread you're pulling out of this guilt thing. Then you'll pull the next one. And
Yeah.
one's red, which is like really like a major one, or one's like pink, so it's a little bit bad. And then there's like a yellow, like a caution one, right? Is the fact that it's not just like once and done, and all of a sudden I'm going to be able to set boundaries, right? It's just,
Right.
you got to know this is about a journey to like really begin to self aware. And I think this is what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, this is why I think if you like to journal, journaling can be really helpful, because you can sort of write out like what the situation was, I felt where in my body, so you can start to identify guilt. And then ask yourself, do the curiosity questions. Well, what did I do that was actually wrong? And then challenge that. Be like your own defense attorney. Oh, my client has
What
the
would you
right.
say to your best friend?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, would you say that your best friend didn't have the right to say no, or and
Exactly.
have that boundary,
Yeah.
or put their
Yeah.
preference out? So you start to ask yourself these questions. And so the way when you do journaling is you would write the question to yourself, do I have the right to want this or feel this? And then the next thing is you answer yourself and you kind of go back and forth, question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. It's a way that you can start seeing your own patterns of thinking. And then you go back like, God, where did I learn this pattern? Because hopefully this value of saying, I don't want, not only do I not want to be a target of manipulation, remember, if you're a parent, you're also role modeling for your child. You don't want to be role modeling being an easy target for manipulation and not having boundaries. If you need to do it in the context of how it helps others, that would be the way
That's
that
how
I
I
would.
had to do it. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah.
I also
Uh,
think what's important too, just one thing about that too that I was thinking about was the importance of if you don't get it right away, it's okay.
yeah.
Just the fact that you're asking those questions, that's the powerful thing. And you might just have an assumption. It could be this, it could be that. You don't have to know the exact answer of when, where, how, but you just have to know that it's something that was rooted in some sort of learning or something, right? So then it doesn't happen again. Like what's the trigger or whatever, right?
What's
So I
the
think
trick?
I don't want to beat up. I don't want you guys to beat yourself up because you write down the journal and you still can't figure it out. It's okay because it might be that thick brain that you still have to figure it out. And that's the whole point of this self-discovery thing. It may take you, 4 times for it to show up before you start to really say, "Oh, that's right." So I just
Yeah, I
want
mean,
to caution you.
it's like learning anything. Like if anybody,
Exactly.
when you learned how to drive, you have to think about everything. Like, oh, like put my seatbelt on, 10 and 2. Thinking about it all, you have a lot of awareness. But after you learn to drive, and now say you've been driving for 10, 20, 30 years, you don't really think about that stuff. So you'd have to actually stop and say, wait a minute, how do I do? It's really more applies to stick shift, but
That's horrible. I still
I
can't
put the
drive a stick.
clutch and
Oh
but I
my
know not people that these days don't learn how to drive stick.
God.
So it's a process that you have to give yourself a lot of compassion, a lot of grace, and a lot of patience to start to unravel where you learn to feel excessive guilt. So it's no longer adaptive, it's maladaptive. Where did you learn that? What are the stories running around in your head? How do you delete those stories, erase those stories? How do you reground in values and your own principles and around having healthy boundaries, not being easily manipulated? And then practice. You have to practice, practice, practice. I know we went over this really quickly. We hope that this was helpful for you. But if I can find something that I think will be useful, I don't know, Karen, if you know of any resources, like we'll put it into the show notes to help you. And then I think one of the things that I've been thinking about that we might want to do in an upcoming episode that would help you with all of these boundary busters is how do you really start that learning to do it differently? Because we're giving the information, but learning new patterns of behavior is really challenging. And each of these episodes, we're usually talking about here are the practices to do. But we would like to go in our next episode a little bit more into how do you set up a practice. So I'm not sure what happened to Karen right now. So I guess I'm going to be signing off for us. Oh no, here she is. Okay, Karen's back. We had a little
I'm
bit
back.
we had a
My husband called me and went into a technical glitch because I forgot to put a do not disturb. So where
but you're
are we,
back now.
Christina?
Well, actually, we're just wrapping up and just encouraging people to take these steps to start a practice, maybe seek out some help and support because this is a really tough one that's going to take some time to
Yep.
unwind and relearn. And then just like thank you all for giving us your time.
Yeah, we want to thank you. And of course, we're going to ask you to subscribe or, subscribe and forward to other people because we want to encourage our listeners to help us subscribe and forward to other people so they can gain this understanding of things that really gave you an aha. So I think that's the only way we can affect each other is by sharing the posts and other podcasts that affect us. And again, leave us a review. We would love it. We would love it, love it, love it. And again, this is what helps us be able to continue to produce things like this. And I have ideas on what's the next podcast going to be.
Yeah, yeah. And matter of fact, our contact information, you can email us at simplyhuman.connect@gmail.com. And so you can send those questions or ideas or suggestions to that email address, or, put something in the comments. We love hearing from you. And it does help us know what you're interested in, because that's what we want to be able to create content around. So, okay, everybody. So, bye, Karen. See you next time.